All right, so let's look at some art world outsiders today. Artists who made work that was driven by something deeper, I think, something more personal.
Definitely outside the mainstream art world for sure. Makes you wonder, how much amazing art is out there.
Oh yeah,
We've never even seen. Created by people who weren't part of the, traditional art scene.
exactly, and that's what makes outsider art so fascinating to me. Our first artist, Henry Darger, he's like the poster child for
What?
hidden genius.
Absolutely. Oh, he lived a pretty solitary life as a custodian in Chicago,
Uh,
and nobody knew about his artistic side at all until after his death in 1973.
wow,
And then, boom, they found this massive 15,000-page fantasy novel he'd been working on, along with hundreds of illustrations.
15,000 pages. That's longer than the entire Encyclopedia Britannica.
Hmm.
What was this epic story all about?
It's called In the Realms of the Unreal,
Oh.
and it's wild. It's a wild ride. Picture this. A fictional planet where child slaves are rebelling against their cruel adult overlords. There's a war going on. And these fantastical creatures called blunging lominians, they're caught in the middle of it all.
Blanging glominines. Okay, you've got to tell me more about these creatures.
They're these bizarre winged beings with horns, sometimes depicted as towering figures, sometimes disguised as humans, and sometimes they have both male and female anatomy. Darger's work can be pretty unsettling, honestly, especially given how often he portrays children in these scenes of violence and war.
Yeah, I think that's what makes his art so compelling. It's this strange mix of childhood innocence and disturbing imagery. It makes you question what was going on in his mind.
Definitely. There's a lot of debate about what his work means, especially since he never really explained it himself. Some see it as a reflection of his own difficult childhood, or maybe his struggles with mental illness. Others see it as a commentary on power dynamics and the exploitation of the innocent.
It's like he created this whole universe in his apartment, completely cut off from the outside world.
And speaking of his creative process, his art style is pretty unique too, right? Oh, yeah. He mainly used watercolor and collage, often incorporating images from magazines and coloring books into his paintings. A lot of his work consists of these huge panoramic scenes, packed with figures and details.
Yeah, it's almost as if he couldn't contain his imagination within the boundaries of a single canvas. He had to make these huge, sprawling landscapes to fit everything in.
Yeah, and you can tell that each piece was meticulously crafted. It wasn't just a random jumble of images, there was a deliberate order to his chaos. Even his collage technique wasn't just about whimsy, limited resources, using what was available. That resourcefulness speaks to the heart of outsider art.
I think what's really striking about Darger for our listener is that he never intended for anyone to see his work. He wasn't creating for fame or recognition. It was purely for himself, which makes it feel all the more authentic and raw.
You don't see that very often in the art world, especially nowadays when everything is so focused on social media and self-promotion. It makes you wonder if that kind of isolation is necessary for truly unique art to flourish.
Now, to contrast that reclusive, almost mythical figure, let's jump to someone a bit more contemporary and accessible. The UK-based artist known as Slart. Slart rediscovered his passion for art later in life, and unlike Darger, is very much engaged with the world, especially online.
Yeah, it is fascinating to see how he uses that online presence to connect with other artists
Wow.
and share his process. It's a completely different approach to art making.
And his style is so vibrant and expressive. He describes it as figurative expressionism. But I think what really draws me in is his use of bold colors and the way he incorporates themes of memento mori,
Yeah.
spirituality, and even 80s, 90s pop culture into his work.
Yes, it's this really interesting blend of the personal and the universal. You can see his own life experiences, his struggles with chronic illness coming through in his art. But he presents them in a way that resonates with broader themes of mortality, resilience, and even humor.
I'm thinking about his piece, Suffocated, with the solitary flower pushing up through the concrete. That one really stuck with me.
Oh, I love that piece. It's so simple yet so powerful. And you're right, that image of resilience in the face of overwhelming odds definitely connects to Darger's work too. Just think of his child warriors facing down those monstrous blingans.
You wouldn't necessarily think that a piece about chronic illness would have anything in common with a fantastical war epic, but there's this shared thread of strength and defiance that runs through both artists' works.
That's what I find so fascinating about comparing these two artists. On the surface, they seem so different. But the more you dig into their work, the more you start to see these unexpected connections and echoes.
And that makes me even more curious to see what would happen if they actually collaborated on a piece. What kind of artistic fusion could have emerged? What do you think?
Well, that's a question that could take us down a very interesting rabbit hole. Let's try to imagine what that collaboration might look like. Imagine those sweeping panoramic landscapes that Darger was known for. Vistas filled with strange plants and creatures, often with this otherworldly beauty.
Yeah, and picture Slart's figures inhabiting those spaces. What do you see happening?
I see a fascinating clash of styles. Darger's landscapes are so detailed and meticulous, built up through layers of collage and watercolor. Then you have Slart's figures, which are often bold, gestural, almost raw in their emotional intensity.
I wonder how those styles would interact with each other. Would they complement or clash?
I think it could go either way. Imagine a scene from Darger's Realms of the Unreal with those soft pastel skies and muted greens. Suddenly you have these bursts of neon pink or electric blue from Slart's figures. It could be jarring, but it could also create this incredible sense of psychological depth.
That makes me think about how they each use color. Darger often stuck to a muted palette, while Slart isn't afraid to use vibrant, sometimes clashing colors. How do you think Slart's use of color might change the mood of Darger's world?
It's like those dreams where everything seems familiar, but the colors are slightly off, creating this unsettling atmosphere.
And then there's Slart's fascination with memento mori and spirituality. Darger's work already has a strong sense of good versus evil, with children caught in the crossfire. How do you think those themes would intersect?
Well, think about those skeletal figures that often appear in Slart's work, representing mortality and the passage of time. What if those figures appeared in Darger's landscapes? Would they be allies or enemies? Protectors or threats?
And what about the blinging lemonades? How might Slart reinterpret those strange mythical creatures?
Right, those creatures are so central to Darger's mythology. Maybe Slart would give them these bold outlines and abstract patterns, or even incorporate elements of his superhero imagery. It would be like a visual remix, taking these existing elements and seeing them through a completely different lens.
What stands out to you about the potential of their collaboration?
It makes you think about the power of two distinct minds coming together. Neither artist could achieve this on their own. And that's the beauty of art, isn't it? It sparks these conversations, these new ways of seeing the world.
We're basically acting as curators here, bringing these two artists together across time and space.
And honestly, it makes me wonder if that kind of exposure could have helped Darger during his lifetime. He was so isolated. What if he'd had someone like Slart to bounce ideas off of? Someone to encourage him to share his work with the world?
It's impossible to know, but it's an interesting thought experiment. Do you think that exposure would have changed his art? Or would it have taken away some of its raw power?
I don't think there's a right answer. Maybe he would have thrived in a more collaborative environment. Or maybe the solitude was essential to his creative process.
Either way, it's a reminder that there are so many different paths to creating art. There's no one right way to do it. And sometimes the most powerful art comes from the most unexpected places.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes outsider art so vital. It challenges our assumptions about what art can be and who can be an artist.
So what do you think about this imagined collaboration? What elements from each artist stand out to you? How do you see their styles coming together? What visual or thematic collisions excite you?
Don't hold back. Let your imagination run wild. It's about letting these artists spark something new within ourselves, within our own understanding of art and creativity.
Yeah, it's amazing to think about these two artists from such different worlds coming together like this.
It really highlights how art can transcend time and space, right?
Yeah.
We've got Darger, this reclusive figure hidden away in his Chicago apartment, and Slart, this contemporary artist who's so engaged with the online world.
And yet, despite those differences, there are these fascinating parallels between their work. They both grapple with these big universal themes of good versus evil, innocence and experience, life and death. It's almost as if they're having a conversation across the decades.
It's a reminder that the human experience at its core is something we all share, whether we're living in the early 20th century or the 21st century, whether we're creating art in isolation or sharing it with the world. There are these fundamental questions that connect us all.
And maybe that's what makes outsider art so compelling. It's so deeply personal, so raw and unfiltered, that it cuts through all the noise and gets to the heart of what it means to be human.
It challenges us to reconsider what we think of as art and who gets to be called an artist, for our listener. I think the key takeaway here is to keep your eyes open for those unexpected sources of creativity.
Right. It could be that reclusive neighbor who's always tinkering in his garage, or that shy coworker who doodles intricate patterns in her notebook during meetings. You never know where you'll find the next Henry Darger or Slart.
And remember, this imagined collaboration between Darger and Slart is just a starting point. It's a way for you to engage with their work on a deeper level, to think about the choices they made, the themes they explored, and how their unique styles could have interacted.
Yeah, we've only scratched the surface here. If you're intrigued, we encourage you to seek out more of Darger and Slart's work.
You can find their art online in books, and even in museums around the world. Trust me, you won't be disappointed.
So keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into the world of art and ideas. Who knows what amazing discoveries you might make along the way.